have some announcements this morning related to testing and course grades in Orange County. And to tell you what's going on, I'd like to introduce our superintendent, Dr. Barbara Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Good morning. Thanks for getting here on short notice. I have two board members here with me, certainly representing all of our board. Everyone could not be here on such short notice. I also have Frank Gilbert available in case you actually are interested in the minutia of the details. I will direct all of your questions toward Mr. Gilbert. A couple of things I'd like to say. First, this board, including Ms. Gilbert and Ms. Robinson and our chairman Sublette, Vice Chairman Gordon, and all of the remaining board members. If I name them, then I'll leave some other name off, so I apologize. But essentially, I want folks to understand our school board and this superintendent and our staff have been advocating with the state tirelessly around these issues concerning the new assessment system. We felt that they were a bit rushed. We felt that the changes were too significant, and most importantly, we advocated for a hold harmless year with the new state assessments. While it is perhaps by default, and perhaps due to our advocacy as well, we are pleased to announce and share with you and with the general public that the state has made some movement in that direction. In fact, they are providing hold harmless of the 30% calculation on 3 of their exams, the Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and Geometry. If you have a state test that has to go through some validation, it would make sense that you would not harm students while that validation still needs to take place. We saw that some time ago, and that's why we advocated so tirelessly around that notion. The state conceded, and on yesterday, agreed that there would be a hold harmless. Now, I have to tell you, they also indicated that if or should districts determine that they would like to use that 30% calculation after they do their validation, we are certainly welcome to do so. I want to be very clear, OCPS will not be going back and recalculating those 30% calculations for students who've taken Algebra 1 and Algebra 2 and the Geometry new EOCs. So I want to commend the state for conceding to that. I want to be very clear that we have advocated for some of those changes all along. Over 60 exams we actually eliminated here under our local board's authority, and had the state not acted in this recent memorandum, we were prepared to do the same on behalf of students for the state EOCs, because it just didn't make sense for students with an unvalidated exam. I also want to review just a couple of additional points for you concerning our common exams, and here in Orange County we want to call them common final exams for our secondary students. We've been looking at ways to make those baseline year as well and hold students harmless. So we've got an even better term that we're using for our secondary students. We're actually going to do no harm to students taking secondary end of course exams, which we call common final assessments here in Orange County. It is usually the norm for students to take a final exam in secondary schools. That is not different. We work to make those common assessments in an effort to be fair with all of our teachers and with our students. And so, here in Orange County Public Schools, for those common final exams, we will do no harm to students. Let me tell you why I differentiate that way. Hold harmless would mean you're wiping them all off the slate. When we look at our first semester outcomes of those students that took exams of one semester courses, several students improved their grades based on that final exam. And so here in Orange County, if you improved your grade based on an EOC locally created, we will keep that improved grade for our students. Any student who sees a drop in their grade because of those local EOCs, we will certainly erase that and put them back to where they were prior to that calculation. I want to be very clear. We will do no harm to secondary students. If you improve your grade with that local final exam, you get to keep it. If there was a harm done to your grade, we will erase that and place them back where they were without the actual exam. I also want to stress that we, some time ago, made elementary EOCs of no impact on student grades. That has been the case. And then a short time ago, we released information saying our third grade students will not be retained based on the new state FSA. Didn't get a whole lot of attention for that one, but I want to be clear. We announced third grade students will not be held back or retained based on the Florida State assessment. Not appropriate in our opinion, and certainly not what we would advocate for on behalf of students. The test being unvalidated at this point only secures our decision that we won't be challenged or there won't be repercussions. So for third grade students, teachers, parents, principals get together and look at all kinds of information. For students that they are concerned about for potential retention, they will look at all of that information, sit around the table and make decisions that are best for those children. I think there was one more item. I think the last point I'd like to make, and this will just further muddy the water. So the state has not removed the 30% statutory requirement for other end-of-course exams that are not new this year. In other words, if they are the old U.S. history, civics, biology, they have not removed the statutory requirement for that 30% calculation. That is not in question at this time. Lastly, if students are doing retakes using the old Algebra 1, Algebra 2, or Geometry, that requirement is not removed either. But any of our students taking that brand new Algebra 1, Algebra 2, Geometry end-of-course exam will have no impact on their grades. And Orange County Public Schools will not be going back to recalculate as the state so generously offered in their communication. I think that concludes our actual comments. We'll take any questions between myself and Mr. Gilbert. Certainly allow our board members to say a word as well. In fact, before I take your questions, let me allow either board member, if they'd like to say a word, to at least say hello.
You've got to go somewhere, so Linda has to get to a graduation.
I'm going to graduate my very first class of 2015 in a few minutes, so I'd like you all to help me congratulate them. Today is a really great day, and today is the result of advocacy work that has been done together with parents, teachers, school board members, and superintendents across the state. All of the advocates working together to tell the state what they've been doing is not okay. And today's the result of that. Today, it doesn't matter who did the work. It's not about taking credit. It's about doing the right thing for our kids. And I'm very, very proud of the decision that Orange County Public Schools has made to do no harm to our children. It's been a tumultuous time, a lot of change, and I think we're bringing our kids in for a safe landing this year. So I'm very, very proud of this decision. So thank you.
And I can't add much to that. Ms. Gilbert is the expert on this. She's been advocating in the state level for so many years on this. And I just, too, want to say how proud we are of the state for finally coming around and changing it for this year, and how excited we are to hold our students harmless in this endeavor. Thank you.
I would add, again, I wish that the details were less complex for parents, for teachers, for the general public. I wish they were less complex. I do believe, however, that our actions are in the best interest of students and teachers while staying within the guidelines provided to us by the state. Happy to take your questions.
So some students, most students have been preparing for these exams for weeks and they've been agonizing over taking them. Why is it just now that you're able to make this decision? It's because of the state's, that advocacy that you're talking about? Or, what would you say to them, the kids and the teachers who've been really agonizing over these tests for so long and now they don't even really matter?
So I wouldn't say they don't matter. That's why I wanted to be specific. Let me separate. State EOCs, we had no control over. We did have to wait for the state to make that determination because statutorily they have that authority. Concerning our local EOCs, we believe that any agonizing over exams has actually proven to improve several students' grades. Over 1,000 students, and I can get you the actual numbers, over 1,000 students for the first semester saw an improvement in their grade. So secondary students are accustomed to having a final exam, and that it is weighted, it counts quite a bit on their exams. The difference this year was that they were common across all of our schools. That is something different for secondary students and for teachers. So any student who actually has crammed or studied and prepared for it and gets a great outcome, they can see an improvement in their grade. We're pleased that we will not take that away from our students. We're just going to make sure any student who suffers during this baseline year sees no harm as well. And I want to tell you, because the state is still advocating, people think that the requirements have been done away with. That is for this year that they've made this provision. The state still will require statutorily that every subject area be assessed and that assessment be part of teachers' evaluations. And then they advocate that you ought to try to be consistent between classrooms and among schools and how you provide that. So with our teachers' feedback, the feedback from our students on this first baseline year of our local final exams, common final exams, we think we'll be able to improve that product and try to be fair to everyone involved. So final exams aren't new. The notion that they are common across the district are new.
What do you make of all the problems with statewide testing this year?
So if I had been a gambling woman, I would have bet my life savings that there were going to be these kinds of issues with the first year's administration of a new assessment. That is why we said repeatedly, Superintendent's Association, School Boards Association, parent advocates, everyone has said repeatedly, it's okay that you want to have higher standards. We want our children to achieve higher levels of higher standards. That's not the problem. We said the timing is not appropriate and that you're headed for a train wreck. In fact, that's what, that was the terminology used by our Superintendent's Association. So what happened is what we predicted would happen. You're going to fall into glitches and complications and issues that really would have been better served if you had said from the beginning, this will be a baseline year. That's what we advocated for. Now, almost by default, because everything, I guess the wheels are sort of coming off the bus in several instances, and because they want a validated test, now they're sort of ending up in a baseline year, which is what we advocated for. A first year assessment would have those kind of complications no matter what it was.
Would you say classroom time has been wasted on some of these tests?
So I have an opinion about actual classroom time because I don't want it to, I don't want the assumption that there's only a test being taught. If you don't actually have the test in front of you, you can't actually teach the test. What you have to do is teach the standards that the test is supposed to measure. And so the new Florida standards we support. They are more rigorous for our children, better preparing them for both college and career. New standards are good, tougher for teachers, certainly tougher for our students, but our students have to be able to compete. And so the new standards are what we promote. The rush to try to assess it and then have those assessments have high stakes connected to them is where we run into disagreement and into a problem.
Superintendent, I understand that you guys have been working tirelessly, so have the parents. I got 2 kids in OCPS. So I understand the do no harm, but the harm is done when it comes down to our students, mentally, physically, emotionally, sitting behind the wheels of those tests, trying to figure out if they're gonna have earphones or not, trying to figure out if the school is gonna supply them, the district that they have. So this all boils down to a big fat knot in our kids' minds and education. So how do we do not harm for our kids in that respect?
So I want to be clear when we say do no harm. This board, nor any school board, has any authority to do away with the Florida State assessment. That is not potentially under the school district's capacity. I also have to give some credit. I don't want to seem as though we are totally blaming Department of Education as though they were totally clueless, because they have certain standards that they were required to meet and certain procedures that they went through for developing the test. So required to have new standards, required to assess those standards clearly. That in itself is not harmful to students. It's when you attach high stakes to them, such as a 3rd grade retention, which we did away with, or high school graduation, which now is held harmless for those 3 particular tests. The harm is when you make them very high stakes. I think we have to admit and assume testing is not going to go away in the state nor in the country. It needs to be done rationally and in a time sequence that makes sure we're getting good results. It can certainly inform parents of how their children are doing. It can certainly inform us on how to better train our teachers. But I don't see that it's going to go away entirely. So the term do no harm, I want to be very clear. We're not saying we've done psychological harm. We're saying for their grades, we're making sure it doesn't harm their promotion and that it does not harm their classroom grades, actually.
And knowing the track record of this testing company and the things that have happened, what is going to be in place or what's being in place so that we don't see a repeat of this year? Because we may be back at this same place next year.
So I'm happy to say that's not my problem exactly. Actually, there is a committee looking at the validation study. The Superintendent's Association will continue to advocate for what we believe is appropriate. One of our superintendents is actually on that panel selecting the individuals or the consultants who will look at the validity issues. So we will stay involved and at the table. The commissioner is actually committed that she will have voices at the table as the discussions continue, but it will remain the responsibility of DOE and the government to determine how they move forward next year. We think there'll be pretty good information to steer that path.
So just
Let me take one other.
Some other districts have already come to this basic conclusion. Can you talk a little bit about what type of process OCPS went through that might have been different, or, you know, it was very deliberate, as I understand it.
I'm glad you asked that. It has been very deliberate. We wanted to be very rational, logical with our processes and with how we reach decisions rather than having emotional responses or knee-jerk responses. And we wanted to do what was logical and rational for our teachers as well. I will give you a clear example. In some districts, because either the EOCs were not ready to move forward, or either their EOCs they deemed not to be appropriate, reverted back to using reading scores for other teachers who didn't have a state exam. This board and I as a superintendent did not believe, and our teachers have said in the past, do not give me reading scores for students if I teach journalism, if I teach dance. Don't give me reading scores. So it's appropriate to have the assessment match the subject matter and the students that the teacher actually works with. Because of the state's lack of direction, several districts, some districts I should say, reverted back to using reading scores or math scores school-wide, or reading and math scores for particular students on a teacher's roster and giving those to the teachers. We did not believe that was appropriate. Several districts have stuck by the EOCs because it's more appropriate, in our opinion, to measure student learning for the actual students the teacher had, as well as the subject matter that they're responsible for. Do we believe that our final exams, common final exams, are flawless? Absolutely not. We're getting feedback, over 1,400 responses from teachers so far on our surveys, feedback from teachers and from parents and from students around our locally created common final assessments, final exams, and we will certainly use that to improve it in the future. I like to tell folks as well, the state has not removed the requirement that you measure every subject area and that you include those measurements in teacher evaluations. And in the latest communication, maybe 2 memos ago, they also said, we'd like to see some commonality, at least some consistency between classrooms in a single school and between schools. So we think this baseline year for us is really going to get us well on our pathway with the feedback that we're getting and any adjustments we might make in this baseline year, that we'll be well on our way to creating that and continuing that process.
Are you able to clarify whether or not this year's 10th graders?
Hang on, I'm taking a question from press first.
Do you have a range of how many students are impacted by today's announcement, any guess?
So in general, I'll be right there, we have graduation going on. So in general, let me tell you, we had about 86,000 elementary students taking tests and about 91,000 secondary students taking tests. The actual numbers that are taking the geometry, algebra, and algebra 2, algebra 1 and algebra 2, I'd have to get for you, but all of those students taking the new assessments would be impacted by this.
And again, to make sure that I can regurgitate this to the mom at home, bottom line, the news today pertaining to end-of-course exams. The state is not going to hold the kids harmless. If you could just reiterate what your points are today so that I can make sure parents understand fully, and myself.
I will, because it is complicated, Gail, I'm sorry, I wish it were simpler. So the state has officially said for the new Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and Geometry EOCs, which had a requirement that 30% of their final grade had to include their outcomes on that test, has now been nullified. Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and Geometry for the new assessments. Any students, Gail, let me further muddy the water, any students taking retakes because they failed it previously on the old version, their retakes are still under that old version. They are not impacted at all, but anyone taking those 3 new tests have been nullified. And then OCPS, we specifically have determined if you are taking any EOC, which in Orange County we call them common final assessments, final exams in secondary like we've always had, only making them common across the board. Students taking those, we have a provision that says, hey, if you improve your grade, you get to keep it. This is the baseline year, we're going to reward you for doing well on that exam. If it hurt your grade, we will nullify it.
And we don't know at this point, you mentioned, I think I've heard elementary school students, graduates themselves. Do we know how many graduates this might be affected, or I guess not now?
So all those calculations are going on this week.
Okay.
And most of our seniors, they would have taken Algebra 1 and Algebra 2 and Geometry previously, and if they're doing retakes, they're still under that requirement. But any of our seniors who came in or took the test for the first time this year, they took those new ones. About 160, I believe, was the last calculation that came into the district and had to take the brand new Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and Geometry EOC. Clearly, those students are held harmless. They will walk if that's the only impediment.
Can you just detail the problem with these tests, with this Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and Geometry tests?
So psychometricians are going to have to take a look at all of that. What the state agreed to is that they would hire additional outsiders to take a look at the new test, to make sure that they are valid and reliable. And so they'll look at several things. Does it measure the subject matter and the course content that was supposed to be in place? And they should be looking at all the glitches, the technology glitches and things that brought some dysfunction to the whole testing environment. So they'll be looking at all of those issues and then making a recommendation whether or not the test is valid. And by that time, our graduates are gone. And so this year, we're not, and that's why the state says, if you want to go back, you can go back and recalculate once we get it. And we said, no thanks, we will clear our students at this point. And very pleased that they've made that provision.
Do you think the state failed to do their job by not doing it?
So I don't want to say that the state failed to do their job. We were concerned all along that it may have been rushed, that an initial year implementing a new exam probably should require at least a baseline gathering year to look at all of these glitches. Going through technology for all of our students to test in most of those subject areas was also risky. So we thought it would be wise at least to call it a baseline year. I want to thank Commissioner Stewart and those at the State Department of Education that have made these provisions, because I think they're going back and saying we have to make this actually a baseline year. In essence, that's what they're doing in several of these areas.
I just wanna, you're saying that students that, took the test and didn't do well on them will not be harmed, they can still walk. Do you feel like those students are still prepared for what lies beyond high school if they weren't able to get through these assessments? Do you think that it was just because the assessments were confusing and, it was baseline year? Do you think that they still have a chance of, doing well?
So that's an excellent question. I believe classroom teachers have instructed and given grades, and if a student is really struggling with the content matter and failing the course, this won't impact them. If you were, let's say for example, you're in an Algebra 1 class and you've struggled and your grade is at a D level or below, this really doesn't help you. So you still have data based on classroom assessments and teacher exams that say whether or not the students have earned that content. Learn that content. So I don't want to imply by any means that this somehow causes students who are failing a course to get credit. It won't. It simply takes away that 30%, a big chunk of their grade that was going to be impacted, that is set aside now, and it will be purely based on what happened in that classroom, whether or not they were able to pass the teacher exams. Excellent question. And I want to say again, we believe in higher standards. We certainly support the new standards. An initial year changing to any assessment would bring some glitches and some concerns and problems, and so that's why we advocated for baseline year without significant harm to students and to teachers. In Orange County, we negotiated no harm to our teachers as well.
Thank you.
Is that it? Thank you very much.
Thank you.